Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of In Pit Lane, coming to you live from the lockdown here beyond the suburban curtain in Grand Prix City, Melbourne. Hope you had a good week, hope you're settling in to your staycation at home, and hopefully we'll be back to normal sooner rather than later. You know, if you talk about great Australian racing drivers, there's plenty of names that come instantly to mind. Of course, touring car legends Peter Brock, Alan Moffat, Bob Jane, Pete Gagan. You also look at Norm Beachy, one of the greatest of all time. Open wheel stars like Lex Davison, John McCormick, Bib Stilwell, and others. Australian world champions like Sir Jack Brabham and Alan Jones. But also locally, if you had a look at just sort of the sheer weight of championships won, then our guest tonight would definitely be right up the top of that list. He has won not just one, but two Bathurst 1000s. He's won an Australian Touring Car Championship, an Australian Sports Car Championship, the Bathurst 12 Hours. He's also won not one, but two Australian Drivers' Championships for the CAMS Gold Star. He's won a Touring Car Masters Series, and he still competes in the Touring Car Masters to this day, as well as being a regular on the local and international historic scene. He is, of course, John Bowe. John started his career back in the early 1970s in Formula V before moving to the mainland and progressing through open wheeler ranks right up to Formula 5000 and later into Formula Mondiale or Formula Pacifica as it was also known in the Rolt RT4. He's also one of the nicest guys on the Australian motorsport scene. I mean, he's always got time for people. It doesn't matter whether spectators, flaggies, officials, other drivers, other team owners. John is one of the more approachable people in the paddocks of Australian motor racing. If ever you go along, he's always happy to sign an autograph, take a photo, show you his car. He's a man who's just got incredible passion about this sport. And I'm pleased to say that earlier this week I had the opportunity of catching up with the one and only John Bowe. Well, joining us now is John Bowe. And John, first of all, I have to ask you, how are you seeing out your lockdown at the moment, and what are you up to?
Well, I'm slowly going mad, or probably I should say madder. I'm just doing a bit of training. I mean, nothing that I'm involved with is happening at the moment, so I've got to say it's frustrating, but I mean, there's a lot worse off than me, so I just try and get through the day. I've done lots of emails, read lots of books. I got a book the other day. You're probably aware of it. It's a new book about elfin cars, racing cars, and that's really good. A guy called David Dowsey wrote it over a very long period, and it was funded by Bill Hemming, who's sort of the custodian of Elfin. And in my early racing days, I had a big involvement with Elfin. In fact, the late Gary Cooper gave me my defining chance to race outside Tassie. So I've been enjoying that, but I'd rather be back at the racetrack.
And it's certainly a big read. We actually had David on as a guest on the show in the studio in the old days when we could go into the studio, like about all of 6 weeks ago. But we had him in it. I mean, that book, apart from being very impressive to look at, the thing weighs a ton.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. I mean, I was my family and I were elfin people from youth, so it's fascinating for me to read because I knew Gary very well, and it's beautifully written and the photographs are fantastic. In fact, I bought another copy and I sent it over to my dad, who owned several elfins before I started racing. So yeah, it's good. It's great to have something like that that'll keep the name alive.
One thing I think you've been doing over the course of this period is cooking. I understand you're quite the home cook. I mean, what's the go-to dish? What's that dish that every cook has one where you get maximum satisfaction and maximum comfort for minimum effort? I mean, what's your speciality?
Well, I mean, I don't want to blow my trumpet here, but there's nothing much I can't cook. So I guess, if you were coming for dinner, I'd probably cook duck and mushroom risotto. So that's a pretty, it's not difficult to do. It has quite an impact. It's beautiful flavours and things. But, like being locked down for all this time, I've gone through most of the things I cook 3 or 4 times. I'm a bit sick of it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's funny you said risotto because mine is wild mushroom risotto, because I've always got dried mushrooms somewhere, and I've always got a Bowe rice on hand. But yes, I must admit, sort of as I was looking at what I'm having tonight, I think we're all starting to get a bit tired of rice and pasta and various.
We're all stir crazy, you know. I did the other day. I did a paella. I know that's not how you pronounce it, but I'm not Spanish. So, which was, you know, it's another rice dish, quite interesting, and then that was good. But, you know, let's face it, I mean, I think we'd all kill to go to a restaurant now, wouldn't we?
That I think, apart from obviously the motor racing, the thing that I'm missing the most is, because I live just down the road from Springvale, and just, you know, the opportunity to just pop down to a Vietnamese restaurant or something in Clayton to a bowl of noodles or something. I mean, that's the thing that I am hanging out for.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate.
So what gave you the initial spur for cooking? I mean, what drove that motivation?
Well, I mean, I've had a few wives in my life, so you know, when you spend time living, you know, as a single bloke, you know, if you don't cook, you got to eat out all the time. So, I mean, I was interested in cooking years and years ago. So it's just, I quite find it quite therapeutic, to be honest, but having to do it every single day is wearing a bit thin, you know. I have more respect now for the mothers of the world that have to cook for their families every day.
Yes, that's it. I think the thing that's going to happen a lot with a lot of men in particular are going to think, you know, we always thought this was easy, but perhaps it wasn't the doddle that we thought it was.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
What we're going to do is we'll get on to motor racing in just a second. We're going to take a break now on In Pit Lane on Channel 31 and Channel 44.
Okay.
And when we return, we're going to be back with our very special guest, John Bowe. So don't go away. You're watching In Pit Lane. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Pit Lane. Our guest tonight is Australian Motorsport Hall of Fame legend John Bowe. John, you mentioned earlier starting your career in Elfins in Tasmania. You went sort of straight into Formula V. I think, you know, back in those days, I suppose karting wasn't the thing that it is nowadays. But tell us your earliest motorsport memory. I mean, what was your first memory of motorsport? Because your father was involved before you, wasn't he?
Yes, my father was involved since I can remember. He was a mechanic by trade, and he used to work on various people's sports cars. So he worked at funnily enough, a Holden dealership as a salesperson, and at the weekend he did this mechanical things. Always our driveway was full of MGs, Austin Healey's, you know, Jaguars, things like that. Always he was a bit of a whiz with carburetors and tuning and all that stuff. And, you know, I've been going to motor races since I can remember. So I remember lots of early day, you know, I'm talking about the 60s, early day motor racing. And I've got a little autograph book which I keep in my safe here, not because it's worth any money, but it's just I don't want to lose it. It's got every, you know, world champion style driver that came, Formula One type drivers that came out here and raced at Longford when Longford closed in 1968. So, you know, Jimmy Clark, Graham Hill, Bruce McLaren, all those sort of legendary people. So, yeah, I've been a motor racing, I mean, this sounds an old cliche, but I've been a motor racing person since birth, and I love it, and it's my life, you know. That's why I find this very difficult, because even if I go to the racetrack with a friend and help him and not race myself, I still love it. I love the motor racing people. You know, it's just my scene. So, yeah, I'm missing it quite badly. I'm sure a lot of people are too.
So back in those days, I mean, in the late 60s, early 70s, before you started, I mean, when you were sort of thinking of becoming a racing driver, when someone said, who do you want to be, you know, who was the hero back in those days before you actually got behind the wheel yourself?
Well, my childhood hero was Jim Clark. My latter day hero was Alain Prost. So I didn't think ever really about going motor racing. When I was 15, I think my dad, I used to drive around Devonport in a little Volkswagen Beetle that I bought that no one knew I owned. So I drove around without a licence. So when my father found out, he said that he would go my halves in a little race car of some sort, and I think he did it to keep me off the street more than anything. So we eventually settled on a little Elfin Formula V, which started our relationship. My relationship with Elfin. My dad already had a relationship with Elfin because he bought a new Elfin 600 in 1970, and prior to that, he'd bought an Elfin Catalina, a single-seater, from Brian Sampson. So we go back quite a long way in Elfin world, and eventually Gary gave me an opportunity to race in the Formula 5000 when I was quite young still. So that was my get out of Tasmania thing. If it hadn't been for that, I'd probably still be there. I wouldn't have raced anywhere, and I've raced lots of places.
You've raced lots of places. You've also raced lots of cars, as you said, going through from your days in Formula V through Formula Ford, and then eventually racing things like Formula 2 in an Elfin, Formula 5000, and right throughout those period of time. Over the years, of all the cars that you've ever driven, what's the one that you remember most fondly?
Well, it's a funny thing because I've driven so many, but the ones you remember fondly are the ones you do well in. So, I had two roll open wheelers. I was fond of those. Some of the Elfins. I mean, I was fond of all the Elfins really, but later on, I raced nationally in a Rolt, which I was obviously did reasonably well in. I did well in, when I joined Dick Johnson in the touring car world, I was quite fond of the Sierra. It's really hard to pick one out. There was a sports car, I'm sure you're aware of it, called the Vescander that K&A Engineering built. I raced that in mid-80s, a little bit later than that, 85, 86, 87. So that was a great car too, but it was the best car around. So, you're always going to win when you've got the best car. So, yeah, I've got lots. I mean, I've threatened many times to write them all down and have a bit of a history of it, but I've never got around to it. It's like writing a book. I've never got around to that either.
Well, the thing is that back in those days, of course, and I remember talking with Sir Jack Brabham about this. Jack told me the story about racing at the French Grand Prix and then going out on Monday back to England to race a Mustang at Brands Hatch, and then the following weekend racing Formula 2 at Hockenheim. Now, in those days, in the earlier days, of course, in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of transfer between drivers. You had people like John Goss who were racing, touring cars, sports sedans, and Formula 5000. We don't see that as much nowadays, whereas you've got that history of racing just so many cars over the years.
Yeah.
Something they're missing out on nowadays.
I did it quite a number of times. I can remember one meeting at Sandown. I raced a Formula 2 car, Formula 5000 and a sports sedan in the one weekend. And you just did it. A lot of people did it, but no one does it now very much anyway. Even though at historic race meetings I love driving more than one car, like at Phillip Island I drove a couple of cars. Sometimes I've driven 3 cars. I think it's just challenging and it's what you do. But at supercar level, that it's so time consuming and it's fairly style centric and elitist that I think most of the guys just concentrate on that so they can get the best out of themselves. But back even in the mid-90s, I raced Ross Palmer's Ferrari. 2000 onwards, I raced Prancing Horses Ferrari as well as a supercar. So I don't know. I just grew up in that era. I like racing cars. So if I could race 6 cars a weekend, I would.
Well, we'll catch up with more about what you're doing at the moment and your plans for the future when we return on In Pit Lane in just a moment. You're watching In Pit Lane on Channel 31 Melbourne, Channel 44 Adelaide, and of course the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. Our special guest tonight is John Bowe, and we'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to In Pit Lane. Our guest tonight is John Bowe. And John, the last time we saw you out on the track was what I suppose at the moment goes down in history as the last major motorsport event to actually happen in this country, and that was the Phillip Island Historic. I mean, you've really embraced historic racing over the past few years. What's the attraction?
Well, it's a really great group of people. I'm very fortunate. I've got a friend called Joe Collegia who's got a few historic cars. I also am friends with Peter Strauss, who's got a couple of very significant and important Brabhams. One was a car Sir Jack drove in early 1969. So at Phillip Island this year, I raced one of Joe's cars, which was an Allard raced in period in 1952 by Carroll Shelby. So it's got a really colourful history. And this Brabham as well. So you got, like one car was built in 1952, one was built in 1969, just on the turn of no wings or wings. So it can run with wings, but Peter runs it without wings. And I've got to say, without aerodynamics, but really good tyre grip, it's fantastic to drive. It really is great to drive. So basically I do it because I love it.
I think the thing about historic racing, I mean, my dearly departed friend Melissa always said when she lost a lot of passion for motorsport, but she always continued with historic racing because she said it's all about the cars. It's not about the business. It's not about the ego.
Yes.
It's all about
it's not about
cars.
The sponsors. But I also, as you know, I race and have done now for 10 years in Touring Car Masters. So that's, my main focus. And we raced in Adelaide, which was great. We had the first round of the ARG Touring Car Masters series, and it's got a good following, because it's good for me because I can give sponsors some exposure because it's got a good following because people love those old cars of the 60s and 70s. So that's what I'm hoping to, I'm just hoping that the world goes back to some sort of normality and I can race in the Touring Car Masters and do a few historic races. We were going to go to America this year with we went last year with Joe and the Allard. I raced it at Laguna Seca. So I won a race at the Monterey historic meeting in the Allard. So it was sort of like channeling my Carroll Shelby, I didn't have the bib and brace overall.
So what, are there any other, talking about meetings like the Monterey Historic, are there any international races that you would like to do? I mean, things like, say, I would assume the Allard would be eligible for something like the Le Mans Classic, for instance.
Yes, I think it is, yes. Yes, I would. I'd love to do the Le Mans Classic. I mean, Joe's got an old Corvette as well that is eligible for the Le Mans Classic. He's also got a car in America, a proper Shelby Cobra competition roadster, but it hasn't come out here yet. It's going to come out here for his guys to prepare it. It's been in the one family for 50 years and it hasn't been raced for 30 years, so obviously it will need some work. We did Goodwood in 2015. That was pretty amazing, and more amazing for the show it is rather than perhaps the track. The track's pretty simple track, very high speed but simple, and but the show, the whole dress up and 50s style stuff is amazing to witness. I think I'd like to race at Spa, but whether I get the chance to, I don't know. There's a lot of very important historic race meetings around the world, but what this coronavirus does to them, I don't think anyone knows at the moment. I mean, it's got to get shut down first and then see if we can go back to normal.
Yeah, I think the problem for us is, if you have a look at it, it was things like major sporting events and international travel were the first things that were shut down, and unfortunately they're probably going to be the last things to come back, particularly international travel. I was speaking to someone earlier today in England and they said, look, we probably won't be back at Albert Park next year, certainly, because even if they allow Formula One to come back, they're not going to be able to get people in and out comfortably because they're probably still going to have to quarantine in some way or another. But that's also depressing. Hopefully that I think what is going to happen is that the sport will come back backwards. We'll see the club racing, the state racing, the national series, and it eventually will come back in that direction. So hopefully by the end of this year we'll be back on the track and we can be watching you and you can be doing what you love.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, not just for me, but for a lot of people. Motor racing embraces a lot of different folk, be it whether they're at a professional level or a fun level or, there's lots of jobs at jeopardy at the moment, so it's not good. But I quite often if I start to feel sorry for myself, I think about the poor restaurant industry and the hospitality industry and which have been brought to their knees. So, you know, I'm at home talking to you. You know, I could be worse, and hopefully we'll see each other at the track again soon. I hope so, anyway.
Well, I certainly hope so. It'll be great to get out there again, and whether it's in the Touring Car Masters or at another historic game, hopefully keep our fingers crossed for Sandown in November, perhaps. That's that's looking possible at the moment still.
Yeah, that's the likely historic meeting for sure. The good thing about it, the lockdown, I guess, is everybody's had a chance to fettle their cars now. Like Joe's Mustang Group N cars had a whole birthday. You know, the Corvettes had a birthday, so they're maintained to within an inch of their life. But really, we'd rather be driving them. There's
a few people who won't have an excuse here. I can think of a few sports sedans that have been sort of ready to debut at Island Magic for the past 7 years or so. They say, I've just been too busy. They're not going to have that excuse now. Island Magic could be pretty big this year.
Yeah, I hope that happens too. I don't know. You know, the people I talk to, talking about maybe August or, you know, maybe Bathurst is the first time we're back. I don't know. I think Australia as a nation's done a pretty good job of containing it, but I have to say, you know, there's still people that aren't playing by the rules. Like I went down to the South Melbourne market yesterday and I was astounded by how many people were, you know, hanging over each other's shoulders and pushing and shoving. It was terrible. I left. I didn't buy anything. It was just too ridiculous. So you know, people have to do as they're told, for God's sake.
Yeah, the point is the quicker that we can, you know, get this to come out as a negative and come out with, you know, a week or two of one or two cases, the quicker we're going to get back to normal. But
absolutely.
But at the moment, before we leave you, I have to ask, you know, what's on the plate tonight? What's being cooked for tonight's dinner?
Well, mate, I haven't actually. I've got to go and get some food. I've got a couple of sources around the area, so I don't really know. Like as I said, I'm getting a bit sick of it, so it's probably going to be past because it's easy. So I do a dish with. I buy some really good pork sausages or pork and fennel sausages, and I cut the end and I squeeze the meat out and make them into little meatballs. I cook the meatballs in the oven and I make a sauce out of, you know, garlic and onion and tomatoes and bits and bobs and anchovy. Anchovy is very important in Italian sauces. So and it's easy. It's easy. So I reckon that's probably
That's what did get me out the other day. Is I actually ran out of anchovies, which is something that normally doesn't happen. And I just went, no, I can't make this without. I'm going to.
No, I did the same. I did the same. It's funny.
Well, enjoy your whatever you cook. I'm sure it will be delightful. I'm sure everyone there will enjoy it, and hopefully we can catch up very soon at the racetrack. But for now, John Bowe, once again, thanks for joining us in Pit Lane.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, mate. It's been great to be on there with you.
Well, thank you once again to John Bowe for making himself available. Had a great opportunity great chance to talk with John. We spoke not just what you saw there, but there was a whole bunch of stuff after the program as well. We spoke about all things. Obviously, food was one of them, but obviously racing and the current situation. And it was great to catch up with him. And he, as I said before, one of the nicest guys in the sport. Now, remember, if you would like to contact us here at In Pit Lane, there's a number of ways you can do it. You can do it via email. It's almost old-fashioned now. Email at the show at inpitlane.com. We have a website, inpitlane.com, where we have links to all sorts of live streaming and things of interest to you. We've also got, we're also on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're even on Instagram. So you can contact us by any of those means, and we'd love to hear from you. And if you go to our YouTube channel, please remember to like and subscribe and click the bell notification. It's like really, really important. But anyway, until this time next week, I don't know who we've got next week. I don't know what we've got next week, but I do know one thing: we will be here. So from all of us here at In Pit Lane, which at the moment is just me, but I'm sure the rest of the crew are sending their love as well. So from all of us here at In Pit Lane, until we see you next week, it's thanks for joining us and bye for now.